Since it's starting to get colder in the upper Midwest, I decided that I would share some of my grandfather's stories he told me about his time working as a forester in Michigan's Manistee National Forest. He never got a chance to write any of his experiences down, so I thought I might post them here. For some background, my grandpa started working in the Manistee area in 1949 when he was 28 years old. Before then, he had been drifting around the region, doing odd jobs and logging until he was hired by the Forest Service in the northwest part of the Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The work, as I understand, was slow, and most days he and his crew were sent to different parts of the forest to address various tree and land concerns. Grandpa was always an avid outdoorsman, and he enjoyed hunting and fishing just about as much as anyone in the region. Sadly, he died in December of 1998, when I was still rather young. But I remember whenever we went to visit him and Grandma, he would sit my brother and me down and tell us about his days in the Forest Service. Working outside every day allowed him to witness all sorts of wildlife, like a black bear, white-tailed fox, and even bobcats back in those days. He often relived his encounter with bears while he was deep in the forest, telling us that those moments were some of the most memorable of his life, being up close to such beautiful and powerful animals. Usually his tales were exciting, and the enthusiasm with which he told them inspired us to go out to the backyard and look for animals in between the pines. Although there wasn't much wildlife around Grandma and Grandpa's property, they still always kept a close eye on us and never let us wander too far from the house. Finally, a few years before his death, Grandpa deemed my brother and I old enough to be told why. I was about 9 and my brother was about 11 when Grandpa first opened up about the strangest things that had ever happened to him. Throughout our childhoods, we had heard him go on and on about the peace that the wilderness brought him, or used to bring him, but this time his tone was completely different. I don't remember all the details, but I asked my brother to help piece together Grandpa's story, and my dad as well. It was the mid-50s, and October had rolled in behind a cool autumn breeze and the sound of Canada geese flying southward. The first of his strange stories had occurred at night, as he was driving home from a local bar where he and his crew had spent the last few hours after work. It was a windy night, and the pines on either side of the road were blowing ferociously. No moon or stars could be seen through the thick cloud cover, so the only illumination of the road ahead came from my grandpa's headlights. By his reckoning, he must have been going close to 50 miles per hour at the very moment when something huge leaped across the road not 20 feet ahead of him. His headlights had shown the animal's silhouette. It was dog-shaped, but massive, almost stretching all the way across the road. It only made one bound to get from one side to the other, and its size alone was enough to unnerve Grandpa. At the time, he assumed that the animal was just a very large wolf, except timber wolves hadn't been spotted in that region for decades. He considered it a bizarre encounter, but nothing came of that night, and he was able to return home without anything else strange happening to him. The second of his stories admittedly frightened me enough to avoid going outside at night for years. Even now I'm wary of noises in the dark, because of the obvious fear in my grandpa's voice when he told us of his second experience. Some details here were provided by my dad. It occurred in the same month as his first encounter, a few weeks later, on a night that was pretty cold for the season. It maybe hit 40 degrees, but it was a calm night with little wind. Grandpa's house at the time was really small, and it stood in a lot with about 6 other similar sized and built edifices. None of his neighbors tended to stay up very late, so it surprised him to be awakened by loud noises at about 1 in the morning. They sounded like scratching on sheet metal, with the occasional thumps and bumps like an animal was trying to get in. Grandpa apparently got up, fetched a flashlight, put on his boots, and went out into the front room. Once in the front room, Grandpa could hear the sounds more clearly, and they were coming from the nearest of his neighbors' homes maybe 50 yards to his right. It was incredibly dark out there, with no streetlights to illuminate. The neighbor's house had a porch light on, but Grandpa couldn't make out what was creating the racket through the screen, so we slowly opened the front door and looked out. He described to us in great detail the animals that he saw there, and he always said he would remember them exactly as they were, for fear brand's memories the strongest. 3 massive dogs covered in long black hair were up against his neighbor's house, scratching at the side and making visible claw marks with every swipe. Each beast stood about 7 feet tall, with their front legs stretching for another 2 or 3 feet and easily reaching the roofing and the gutter of the house. Their scratching, however, did not make it seem like they were trying to get into the house, as Grandpa explained. He thought that they were doing that to get whoever was inside out. The next part was actually the hardest to get out of my grandpa. It was strange that he was so eager to tell us everything thus far, despite how he felt about the subject, but he was rather hesitant to divulge the last horrifying details of his encounter. He claims that the animals then noticed that he had emerged from his own house, just across the lawn, for each one turned to look straight at him, just 50 yards away. They had pointed ears like wolves and huge bodies that rivaled large black bears in size. They also supported themselves not with 4 legs like any other native mammal, but instead they stood on 2 legs each, towering 7 feet above the ground. The sounds that they produced, Grandpa had said, would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. It was a shame that he could neither produce recordings nor accurately mimic the unwolf-like screams the animals made, for that detail always fascinated me the most about his story. They didn't sound like foxes, coyotes, or bobcats. It was a half-human, half-wolf scream. Grandpa never told us exactly what happened next. I guess we assumed that he ran inside, locked the doors, and didn't look outside until morning. He would tell us that the 4 of his neighbors didn't stick around very long. He did say that he tried to talk to them about what had happened that night, but they remained evasive and never gave him any straight answers. That turned out to be somewhat ironic, because Grandpa himself kept a tight lip about many of the details of his stories. He would say that he heard those exact screams on 2 other occasions, both times while he was in the Menestine forest, and he showed us an old Forest Service report detailing a possible timberwolf sighting in the area. The thing is, Grandpa never told anyone his stories but his most trusted family, which is unique among Michigan dogman witnesses. After the craze that Steve Cook's Legend song stirred the 80s, it's no wonder that so many stories from the region surfaced. I heard a few bits and pieces about the so-called monster before Grandpa told his tale, but it wasn't until later in life that I realized his encounters had to have been with the same creature. Whether I believe him that massive wolves walk upright through Michigan forest, well, I'm still not so sure, but as a modern zoological curiosity, the stories of strange beasts from a passionate woodsman who knew his wildlife certainly remain among the most remarkable I've heard, simply because of the genuine emotion with which he related his tales. Legends like these might just be figments of our collective imagination, so all I could do is present what I've heard, and let others judge for themselves what is real and what is pure fiction. Anyway, as the song goes, don't go out at night.
Back in 2013, I was at a university. It's in England, in the countryside, and the uni has lots of accommodation, a few shops, banks, and great nightlife. It's also surrounded by woodland and a couple of lakes. Some of you may already know where this is. I want to preface the story by saying that during the time, there had been a few attacks on girls late at night, so the university had installed extra lighting in one area. This incident happened where there wasn't any extra lighting. I was aware to keep myself safe. I also want to state, I was not just drunk, but totally wasted when this incident occurred. So please, forgive my lack of sensible decision making. Here we go. I had been getting drunk with the guy I was seeing at the time. After we were very wasted, we decided to walk back from the lake near the woods we were drinking at, and to go back to my accommodation. To get back to my accommodation, we had to walk through the main, busy part of campus, then through an isolated part, then through a small field/wooded area with a path that led to the accommodation. I never would have walked this at night on my own. As we were walking, I spotted this girl. She was slightly shorter than me, but with very pretty blonde hair. I noticed her because of how out of it she looked, and the fact she was walking in a weird way. She's actually walking in the same direction as us, and she speeds up towards us. Then she just goes right past. Maybe 1 minute later, a guy passes us by too. There was nothing weird about this in itself, because there's obviously going to be students walking back to their rooms after the club closes. But despite being drunk, I just got this odd feeling. I told the guy I was with I had a feeling we should speed up, and he told me I was being dramatic. He would later eat his words. At the same time, for some reason, I had the foresight to mentally note what the guy looked like and what he was wearing. He was tall, skinny, has brown short hair, and one of those studded belts you almost never see nowadays. I sped up because, like I said, weird gut feeling. My male companion speeds up with me. We got to the bottom of the concrete stairs, and after that is the woodland area. Just as we turned the corner, my heart sank. I could see the guy walking faster to the girl on the field, clearly drunk. Both me and the guy just froze. I think out of fear of overreacting. I swear to God, the next part nearly made me sick because of how quickly it happened. The guy pounced on the girl, and she fell. He then grabbed her and started dragging her to the wooded area near the field by her limp arms. We were about 40 meters away, I guess, give or take, in a position where we could see them and they couldn't see us. The guy I was with threw his backpack to the floor and sprinted towards the guy. By the time he was halfway there, the guy had obviously noticed him, but froze, like a deer in headlights. At this point, I was running towards the scene too. The guy I was with pushed the creep away pretty forcefully. I ran to the girl and helped her up, trying to ask her where she lived, what her name was, etc. She was totally out of it. Please bear in mind, both myself and the guy I was with were drunk. Had I been of sound mind, I would have handled it differently and called the police or campus security there and then. The creep proceeded to shout at us and tell us it was his girlfriend and he was getting her home, that she was drunk and that they had an argument. He assured us he was getting her home, and the guy I was with believed him and pressed to me we should leave them alone. Looking back in my non-drunk state, I realized this doesn't explain him trying to drag her into the wooded area. So, we let them go. But I tell the guy I was with, I'm gonna follow him. At this point, the guy I was with begins to get annoyed at me. I mean, really annoyed. I guess he was in a rush to get back to my place, and was also totally drunk and not thinking clearly. We were whisper arguing and had only moved slightly, but the guy had made a considerable distance on us with the girl. It was difficult to see them because we were now standing under an illuminated area and they were ahead in the darkness. I knew I didn't want to go back to my place, and I knew I had to keep an eye on the girl. Then, we saw it again. Brazenly, foolishly, this guy started dragging her toward the wood. My male companion obviously realized he definitely wasn't her boyfriend and made another sprint toward him. This time, the creep sprinted off in the other direction. I got my phone out and called campus security, and we took the girl to her building while we waited for them, and they took over. The next day, I had to make a statement in writing. I found out from the lady who was head of the resident support network the girl was doing fine and her friends were made aware of the situation, and she was being walked to and from places with security on speed dial. Unfortunately, I do not know who the man was and what happened with him. Please be careful when walking alone. Always go with a friend, even if you think it's somewhere safe, like university or your own neighborhood.
I'm not one of those people that looks up fucked up things for fun. All my mates are, and while they all cringed and told horror stories about all the shit they'd found online, I just shrugged impassively. Pain Olympics, one lunatic, one ice pick, all that sort of thing. None of it bothered me. Why would I be disgusted by what was inside of all of us? All the blood and guts we've all got pulsating inside of us right now. Any torture or pain inflicted on bodies didn't do anything to me either because it obviously wasn't happening to me, so why should I care? One of my mates, Johnny, was into finding gruesome shit online, so he scoured the deep web whenever we were around at his house. You know, that big scary place with human trafficking and experimentation and worse. It didn't interest me much, so I was just watching these videos Johnny dragged up on some deep web video hosting site, not making a sound while all the others gasped or explained in horrified amusement. Nothing caught my eye until a link and a thumbnail to another video entitled Human Blob 2,000 Pounds Plus Feeding, Breathing, Suffocation was in the related video section of one of the gorefests my friends were still carrying on about. Most of the videos around here had sensationalist titles that didn't really explain what was actually in the video, but in spite of that my heart was pounding. This was a lot more interesting than any of the rape or mutilation videos my mates kept forcing themselves to watch, but I wasn't about to demand them to click on the one that had something to do with an impossibly fat human body, as interested as I was. That's one of the things that disgust me and excites me. I watch every single one of those half-ton whatever documentaries. World's Fattest, I've seen them all. It's something out of morbid obsession by now, but all of the fatties in those documentaries were too boring for me now. I didn't take sickening delight from their just barely immobile bodies anymore. I had to see this 2,000-pound human blob. And finding it took me almost half the night, but I finally had it. The preview showed just a creamy pile mess, something that could have obviously been faked with proper effects, but as soon as I started the video, I knew it was real. The first thing that was immediately obvious was the sound. There was the hum of a machine, the rhythmic sound of a pump, and the loud, desperate sucking, occupied with wheezing, gasping breaths, like a huge baby feeding from a bottle. The camera showed the machine first, which looked like a huge clear canister, full of something yellow and greasy, which was connected to a tube constantly pumping the slushing yellow half-solid liquid into the huge white mound. When the cameras got a good look of the blob's face, I almost threw up. The features were barely recognizable. The cheeks looked inflated like balloons, almost covering the mouth of the thing. But even its lips were fat, plump and coiled around the tube, seeming to grip onto it with desperation. There weren't any eyes. The surrounding flab from the cheeks and the forehead had completely covered them up. This thing was so fat it couldn't see. That thought alone had me perspiring as I watched, my face flushed and my dick half hard. I told you, it disgusted and excited me. Two-way street. You're probably expecting this thing to have about 7 chins, but it was too fat for even that. Instead, it just had a huge fat roll that the rest of its face was sinking into lopsidedly, that undulated grotesquely with every suck on the tube. Then, the first time the person who was holding the camera made an appearance, their hand darting out to pull the tube from the monster's lips, letting the greasy mixture fall in between its neck roll and its cheek flab. The blob didn't like that. It let out a snorting groan, its breath coming out in a short, heavy gasp as it seemed to be working up the energy for something. More. It could barely speak, its voice coming out as little more than a grunting whisper at first, sounding like the blob had just ran a marathon when all it had done was spoken. More! It screamed then, drool that looked like it was mixed with lard hanging out of its mouth. Its assistant, presumably whoever was holding the camera, quickly stuffed the tube back into the blob's mouth. Then, the camera showed the rest of the thing's body, which looked even less human. 2 sacks of fat lay heavily on the floor at either side of the creature, and I assumed they were breast. That still didn't help me decipher whether this thing was male or female, matted with sweet and practically glued to the thing's fat anyway. The voice was the closest thing I had to a deafening sign, and it was pretty deep, so I assumed it was male, though I knew fat women's voice got pretty deep too. The belly was the most awe-inspiring feature of the blob. Obviously, it towered a good 4 feet, stretching out about 5 feet, and rising and falling and shaking with each labored breath and each desperate suckle on the tube, which I now assumed was full of lard. What else would a person who weighed a ton and could barely speak eat? It wasn't like McDonald's was an option at this point. The belly was wet with a shiny sheen of sweat, showing that just existing was a large amount of effort for the fat man. I wondered idly how it must smell in that room, and wondered if I felt lucky or unlucky that I wasn't the fat man's assistant. Just as I was marveling on how the limbs had been absorbed into the great beast of the blob's belly, just chubby parodies of fingers and toes remaining, the camera was placed on a stand, and footsteps could be heard against the tile floor. I took that opportunity to look at something in the video that wasn't the monstrously huge creature. It seemed to be in a large basement that had drains everywhere, like a wet room, presumably for easy cleaning of the blob, and the loud metallic hum told me that the air conditioning was constantly on high. That explained the goosebumps prickling the assistant's arm earlier. I thought the video was just going to be staring at the man's fat for the remaining 3 minutes and a half, and I was fine with that, until screams and gasps and grunts of exertion could be heard above the din of the man's machine, and his gasping breaths and gluttonous feeding. The assistant came into shot, looking like a pretty muscular kid about my age, which was around 18 to 19, hauling another boy the same age, but pretty chubby and screaming and crying and tied up with a coarse rope. The blob let out something close to a moan at that, and yeah, I do mean the kind of moan just before an orgasm, or just before a meal, maybe. The assistant held up a fold of the beast's belly, clearly with a bit of difficulty, but I suppose that's where he got those muscles from. Suddenly, he shoved the chubby guy's head inside and let the belly fold flap over his head, enveloping in fat. The kid squirmed and withered desperately but couldn't get his head free, until finally he stopped moving altogether. This man's flab could kill a person. My mouth was desert dry by that point, my heart palpitating in what I hoped was just terror. Throughout the murder, the blob was making horrific noises, groaning and snorting like a pig in heat. Clearly this was one of the things he enjoyed other than eating. The assistant pulled the dead boy away from the belly, dragging his lifeless corpse away and out of shot, leaving me with a sleepless night ahead of me and a resolve to track the source of the video down tomorrow.
A little background story about me. I am a female, Colombian, 29 years old, athletic and adventurous. I enjoy traveling, walking, hiking, and camping. This happened about 6 years ago. In one of these trips, I was with my ex-boyfriend and our 2 dogs. He had a crossbreed brown lab-looking dog, and mine is a golden retriever. Not scary dogs at all, but certainly big and with powerful barks. We always went walking with them on trails and exploring around the city limits, but this time he had heard about this river in the middle of the mountains, with a huge cascade that seemed to be out of this world. The place was described to him by his college mates, and it sounded beautiful, so we assumed it would be a fun way to spend our Sunday morning and early afternoon. We packed simple bags with sandwiches, snacks, water, and beer, and off we went. Once we made it to the beginning of the trail, the dogs seemed impatient. They were very active when they were together, so we assumed they just wanted to run, and we let them loose. The mountain started out in a very steep way. We pretty much had to climb along sharp rocks for about 15 minutes before we could reach the actual trail. Keep in mind that Colombia is nothing like the United States. Our wild areas are actually wild. No trails designated, no forest rangers, no watchtowers, none of that sort. Once you are out of the city limits, you are pretty much on your own. And there are certainly no cops or anything around these areas. They are highly underpopulated and overall deserted. Once we reached the trail, we noticed that it was hardly visible to see it. Trails are usually patches of the forest that are not as prominent, so you can see somewhat of a trail left, but it was made by people or animals walking around. So it gets very faint sometimes, and many times you don't see it or have no idea where to go. This trail was like that, which we actually liked, because that meant there would be no people around bothering us and we could smoke and enjoy the river on our own. We got excited and kept walking through the almost invisible trail. A little ways down, we started hearing branches break, voices, and a little bit of laughter. We looked at each other with disappointment because we wanted to be alone, and these sounds clearly indicated that we were not. We kept walking and then saw some colors and shapes through the bushes. They stopped as well and saw us. The elderly man waved and he was getting closer. His wife walked behind him, holding him from his elbow. They walked slowly as we exchanged pleasantries about the day and what a nice day to hike sort of thing. When they reached us, he looked up at us as he was petting the dogs and said, "Are you guys heading back?" To what we responded with, "No. We actually just got started and we wanted to reach the waterfall in the mountain over there." He looked at where I was pointing and frowned. I found it odd, and then he replied, "You guys should be careful. I hear a lot of stories about people getting lost in these parts, or even worse. You are better off heading back with us." We both thought the old man was just being a wet blanket, and we were somewhat experts in trails, hiking, camping, and living on the edge. So my ex said, "Nah, we'll be fine. We have these two beasts to protect us." To what we all kinda chuckled. He then said, "Well, anyway, be very careful. And you, sweetheart, you should tuck in that little gold chain inside your shirt. You never know who is looking for that stuff to yank it off." I had to think about that. I was wearing a little gold chain on my neck, except it wasn't golden. It was a 24-karat gold chain that was given to me by my godfathers when I was born. It was my tradition in my family that every time a baby was born, all the uncles, aunts, friends, and close family members gave us gold accents with different shapes and forms, as well as a chain to hang them all from. This is a Colombian thing, and it mostly endures good luck for the new baby by presenting gold gifts as the 3 wise men did to Jesus. I had found the chain on my mom's safe during my last visit to her house, and was wearing it ever since. No accents though, just the chain. The accents were so many that they weighed a ton, but I liked the chain because it made me feel safe somehow. I grabbed it instinctively and tucked it inside my shirt collar. We exchanged goodbyes with the couple and off we went. We were hiking for over an hour, stopping here and there to take pictures, drink water, or give the dogs a treat. Nothing weird until then, and we were almost at the mountain. We could faintly hear the waterfall. The next part of the way was rougher though. We had to climb down this cliff. Literally, a cliff. And we didn't bring any gear, so we had to be extra careful with the dogs, but they did it rather quickly and with no hassle. While I was heading down though, my ex was waiting for me at the base of the cliff with his dog. Mine had turned back to come down again with me, but stopped at the top and stared at the woods before the cliff. She stared and then started growling. This is weird. My dog is by far the sweetest dog ever, and she never growls. But this time, she seemed fierce. She kept growling more and more while I called for her. Fermina, come here." Then she looked at me almost halfway down the cliff, and then back at the woods, and then back at me again and started heading down. She would stop every now and then and stare back at the woods, but eventually got down with me and we kept walking. The mountains have created a natural junction with water falling from the very top to a clear pond at the bottom. The water was freezing cold and the noise was pretty intense. The dogs were beyond themselves. They started running, jumping, chasing each other, barking, and swimming. We got off our clothes and jumped in as well. It was delicious. The cold water against the hot weather felt like heaven, and we were high by then, so the sensations were very strong. We kept playing in the water for a while, then we got out and sat on the rocks to smoke some more. After a while we heard the dogs barking, but not playfully like before. They were barking loud and menacingly. We looked at them and they were both at the very edge of the pond, staring at the woods on top of the mountains and barking. The fur on their backs was raised. They looked creepy. I called Fermina again, and my boyfriend did the same with Rebecca, but none of them flinched. Their paws were firm on the ground, grasping at it. Their barks were so loud it was becoming unbearable. I got up and walked over there and grabbed Fermina by her torso, just kind of giving her a hug and pulling her towards me. She kind of snapped out of it and started licking me ferociously. I kept asking, "What's wrong, girl? What's wrong?" She just whimpered and licked me and then started going back and forth from the edge of the pond to where I was kneeling. She whimpered really loud, like crying, and I was getting scared. I said to my ex, "Screw it, I'm out of here. She's acting really weird." Rebecca, his dog, always barked at everything, so he wasn't concerned at all. He agreed and we started packing. Then I heard something. A whistle. It was definitely a human whistle. Sounded like a little melody. First a long one, and then 2 short ones. I stopped dead on my tracks and tried to hear it again, over the barking and the waterfall, but couldn't hear it anymore. I thought to myself, weirdest bird ever, and put my backpack on. We started walking back to the cliff again, and the dogs were getting worse. It was almost impossible to hear anything besides them barking and growling, and Fermina whimpering by my side. I started climbing first. My ex was behind me, and the dogs made it to the top in no time, and started barking again and growling at the woods. I kept telling Fermina to shut it, but she wouldn't, and then I finally made it to the top. One side had a huge drop of over 50 to 80 feet, and on the other there was the woods. Tall pine trees and wild bushes everywhere made them look dense and deep. I urged my boyfriend to hurry because the dogs were unbearable, and then I heard it. Branches breaking. The dogs got even more aggressive. They started running towards the edge of the forest back and forth to where I was. I just stood there, staring as well. More branches. Now they were getting louder. I knew someone was there, getting closer with each step. I kept trying to see past the tree line, but only saw green and brown and darkness. But then a figure started emerging from it. First I thought it was another couple, or maybe just a hiker like us, but this figure was moving weird, a little bit too heavy to be a hiker, and slowly, and had no backpack, but the hands were holding something in front of him. A shotgun? What is this? I freaked out. The dog started barking louder, and Rebecca almost jumped the guy when he came out of the woods. He was stocky, wearing a black jacket, shotgun pointed straight at me. I yelled at Rebecca, "Stop, come here," and she actually did. Weird, because she never listens. He then said, "Tell your boyfriend to come up," and I just took a couple of steps back. I was almost on the edge of the cliff and stared down. My boyfriend was almost there, and he had heard the voice of the man. He hurried up and climbed to where I was. I was just standing there, petrified, not being able to talk, just looking at the dark circle of the shotgun barrel. Then I caught a glance of something shiny, something metal looking. He had a machete hanging from his belt loop. Just like that. A huge machete with rusty edges. I was beside myself, but I managed to grab my boyfriend's hand as he stood up on the top of the cliff and stared at the man. My ex was nothing less than scary. He was easily 6'8" and weighed over 200 pounds. I don't know how much because we use metric system in Colombia, but he was for all intents and purposes a big, muscular guy. His green eyes glared as he stared at the man. He then said, "Take what you want and leave us." The noise the dogs were making was extreme. The guy looked at me and pointed the gun as he said, "Grab those dogs and shut them up, or I'll shoot them both right here." I called them softly and grabbed Fermina by the collar. She started licking me and whimpering, scared, and not understanding what was going on. Rebecca was a little rascal, so I kind of crawl on the ground and grab her by the back leg. She then turned around and I grabbed her collar. I held them both close to me while I petted them, whispering, "Shh. It's okay, girl," over and over. I was in tears by then, but my ex stood his ground and just kept glaring. I saw his fists as he had them tightly closed as if he was going to punch the guy. Then the guy whistled. It was the same whistle I have heard before. The long one, and then the two short ones. The weird bird. Two more figures started coming out of the woods on each side of him. One of them had a silver revolver, and the other one was just standing there, menacingly. He then said to my ex, "Don't try anything stupid, pretty boy," and they started getting closer. I actually thought of jumping off the cliff, but then what? Even if I made it alive, they could easily shoot me from a distance in the canyon underneath. We were trapped. He then said, "Give me the bags," to which we replied by taking them off and sliding them on the ground closer to them. And then he said, "Stand up." Looking at me and pointing the gun, I could now see his face. He had sunspots all over and really bad acne. His eyes were dark and small, like a bird's eyes. His hair was greasy and covered with a dirty black beanie. A big round nose completed the look and gave him an almost comical appearance. Nothing comical about the shotgun though. I stood up, holding the collars of the dogs tight together, and he then said, "Not bad. Not bad at all." He then turned to look at the guy with the revolver and said, "Bring me that gold chain." I kind of gasped when he said that, and the other guy started walking towards me. The dog started pulling the leashes. He stopped and looked at them and then at the other guy and said, "I don't like these fuckers. Let's just get rid of them." I was full on crying by then and just said, "No, please, no, hold on. I'll get it for you." I took the leashes with one hand and with the other, yanked the chain off my neck and then turned and gave it to my ex. He grabbed it and stared at me. He knew how much it meant to me and my family, but it was either that or our lives. He turned and walked towards the guy. He grabbed it quickly and went back to his position. The other guy then stared at us, then back at the guys on his side and asked them, "Have you ever had your way with a little spoiled girl?" And they all laughed. I felt like throwing up. My ex looked even more angrier now. He then said, "We don't have anything else. Please let us go." Then the guy quieted down and stared back. "You do have something else. I'm deciding whether or not to let you walk out of here with it." And then gave me a perverted look that made my skin crawl. My ex then said, "Sure, you can have your way with her." In such a calm way, I thought he was giving me away, but then added, "After you fucking cowards fight me one by one and beat me until I'm dead, cause that is the only fucking way." They all laughed at this, loud chuckles, and then he said, "Nah, not worth it. I can just shoot you and be done with it," and then pointed the gun at him. I was in shock. I couldn't believe this is how our lives were going to end. Massacred over a stupid gold chain. 1,000 thoughts were going through my head. I was shivering when I heard this really faint whistle, very far away. Same frequency as theirs, but it was definitely far away. At least 3 miles away. It was faint, but I heard it, and they did too. The guy with the shotgun stopped laughing and stood still as if trying to listen better this way. And then the whistle was there again, but this time, the first whistle was way longer, and the three of them started walking backwards, almost retracing their steps back to the woods, and then the guy said, "You two fuckers are in luck," and turned around and disappeared as fast as they had shown up. My ex and I exchanged looks of astonishment and then bolted out of there, running through the woods like maniacs. The dogs were rattled up and they also jumped and ran all the way down to the main road. We didn't stop, we didn't talk, we didn't even look back. We just ran and jumped and stumbled until we were in the first climb again. Then we looked back. I thought I saw something moving behind the tree line, but I brushed it off as I jumped down and called out to Fermina. We then started walking home at a slower pace this time, not excited anymore, thinking how we would enter the flat without any keys. They were in my backpack. I touched my neck and the yanking of the chain left a little red mark. After all, it was solid gold.
My partner lives on the edge of a large unspoiled state park with miles of forest all around. When I'm there working on our project, I have to go outside to smoke, and I would usually just sit on a log and scan the wilderness for deer or other critters to pass the time. It's very quiet, no traffic sounds, just the raw wildlife. One afternoon, as I sat looking into the woods, I heard what sounded like a baby or a very small child crying. By the sound of it, I would guess it was no more than 100 yards into the forest, but the trees and brush obstructed the view. I'm no stranger to the woods, and I was certain that sound was probably a fawn looking for its mother and not a human, so I went back to work. Soon after that, I had to drive into town for parts, which took about 2 hours before I got back. The sun was just going down as I took up my usual smoking spot. The crying continued with a sense of urgency coming from the same approximate area in the woods. I was still convinced it was a baby deer and supposed its mother was dead somewhere. I was at a time-critical part of the project and really couldn't stop to go rescue a baby deer. About an hour later, I was at a stopping point and went out for a smoke. The crying was still there, and by now it sounded like it was losing strength. It was now or never. I went inside and got a wall-charged spotlight with a green light indicating a full battery and a short piece of rope. By now, it was jet dark out with heavy cloud cover as I dutifully plunged into the brush at the edge of a ravine that was steep enough to have to slide down on my butt, walk through the shallow creek, and scale the other side using roots and branches to climb up. I expected to come back through this with a baby deer in my arms and would just have to deal with it when I came to it. Once I got back on level ground on the opposite bank, the crying sounded closer, but still not visible in the search beam. This area was new growth with saplings and thorn brush extending up a slight incline with the occasional oak and walnut trees. I stopped to rest and looked around to get my bearings, but couldn't see any lights from the house. Nothing but woods, and a crying baby somewhere in the middle distance. I plodded up the incline for approximately 100 yards in the direction of the sound, but still couldn't visualize the animal. It still sounded like the crying was about 100 yards away. I guess it was walking away from me, so I called out in a soft, unthreatening manner. The crying paused for a second, then started again. I thought maybe it stopped walking now, and I kept going. "It's alright, buddy. I won't hurt you." I pushed my way through the tangles and thorns to another open area where I stopped to scan with the light. Nothing but the sound of crying just out of sight. Now that I was closer to the source, the sound was eerily like a human, which just made the circumstance all the more frustrating. If it was a child, it apparently didn't speak English because no calls were answered. By now, I thought it was a child lost in the woods and was too terrified to speak to me. Between me and the sound was a formidable fortress of blackberry bushes with a spiderweb of grapevines covering the outer surface. This is tough to get through even with a chainsaw, so I knelt down to low crawl into the base. That's when the light went out. No fade out, no warning, just off. The battery indicator was also off. This device was completely dead. The darkness was absolute as I stood back up to get my bearings. The crying had stopped, and there was no sound. No crickets, peepers, sounds of any kind. I looked around without moving my feet so I could approximate the direction I had come. Not a single light of civilization could be seen. Now, the flashlight had become a useless piece of responsibility that occupied one of my only two tools: my hands. I had left my lighter and cigarettes on the log since I didn't know it was going to take this long. I had the rope around my neck and shoulder, and that was the extent of my resources. The crying sound was replaced by a whimpering from apparently the same original location, about 30 feet through the bramble fortress. As I stood there in absolute darkness, I did the math. If it was human, I was obligated by creed and honor to attempt to reach this child under these conditions, even at my own peril. So, I knelt back down. I had to go. I had to. I took off the robe so I could snake through the thorns with as little snaggage as possible. I took in a deep breath and ready to go in. Then, I heard a giggle coming from right beside my right foot. In my mind, I could see it from about 4 inches away and from about 12 inches high. Under any other circumstances, I would immediately conclude a practical joke and even gave that the benefit of the doubt. For a moment. Hard as it was, I kept my feet planted so I wouldn't lose the only thing I had, a relative direction to go back to the world. There was no more crying, and I had the feeling the giggle came from the same organism, now somewhere behind me. I heard leaves ruffle and small twigs cracking here and then there. It giggled again with an unmistakable lilt of threat about 5 feet to my left. Then I heard a second giggle coming from up above, about 20 feet away, not moving. A split second later, it had soundlessly joined the first on the ground to my left and giggled from roughly the same 12-inch stature. They were able to circle me and move off very fast, judging by the sound of the leaves and stems. At this point, I had concluded there was no child in danger, and I needed to get the hell out of there. I did an about face and started off thinking, even if I'm off by several degrees, I'll still eventually see light from the house. When you make the decision to flee, it starts a cascade effect of fear and harder flight. The two entities were staying about 2 feet behind me as I began picking up speed, slamming face first into oaks and plowing through raspberries without regard to ripping and tearing of flesh and clothes. Still, my pursuers outright laughed as I barreled through heavy growth. Spiderwebs and blood covered my face, and at one point, the laughing came from just inches from my right ear. I felt like a stampeding steer, blindly bulldozing anything in its way. I finally reached the edge of the ravine, and now I could see the house light and my partner on the other shore. I half slid and jumped down the 20-foot wall into the creek with a faceplant. While struggling to get back up, I could hear the two giggling/sneering entities from the edge of the ravine. My partner called out, "Are you alright?" And I replied, "Can you see them? There's 2 of them right near the edge. What the hell are they?" He said he could only make out 2 black blobs from the lip of the wall. That's about all I could see of them too. The house light had little effect this far out. He asked again, "What the hell is going on?" Just then, as I was clambering up the other back, the 2 creatures flew silently, except for the vocalizations, near my left ear, up the bank, and right past my partner's shoulder, and out of sight. I have no idea what they were, and my partner, who is a wildlife veterinarian, had no clue. This is not fiction, and this description was from my corroborated memory. I can tell you, sleep was not in my immediate future. So I googled the history of the area, and sure enough, an old Indian legend of the crying voice in the woods, luring young warriors to their death.
I'm going to hop straight into this. I am an American police officer in the upper Midwest of the country. I'd get into more detail, but I feel like this is the type of shit that needs to stay vague. Pardon my language, but I'm shooting for answers here. I'm not trying to win any awards. That being said, this is going to be the nitty-gritty of what happened. No flair, no fibs, just the honest truth. As a police officer and a former confinement guard, I have seen some shit, literally shit. People slathered in the crap. Throw a guy in a cell and the first protest he does is going to involve shit. That's explainable though. They know we don't want to deal with them when they are covered in fecal matter. That's why they do it. What gets to me personally is something I experienced on the road that isn't natural. It's not explainable, especially to a rockhead like me. The night this happened was during the start of spring. It was my partner's first day out on patrol and I was the guy lucky enough to take care of him. I didn't mind it too bad at the time, to be honest. He was a good kid. Besides, we worked nights, so having company that distract you from falling asleep wasn't all that bad. The first night with someone new usually involves a good deal of instructions and a greater deal of fuckery, but that only gets you through half the night. Once that custom's over, the only thing left to do is to ask them about themselves, and of course that was the excuse I used to get off the road for a bit. That night I pulled my patrol vehicle down a dirt path off the main road. That road in particularly doesn't lead anywhere, it just goes off near some hills and loops back to the entrance. This is the type of road a lazy cop like me loves. Only one entrance and plenty of space to hide in the darkness far off from the main road. On a normal night, I would rack out in my seat and wake up just in time for a changeover at the station. I know, I'm a horrible cop, yada yada, but nothing happens out here, and if it did, I was never late to the show. So that night, me and my partner parked the vehicle about 1.5 miles into the darkness and shut off our lights. We were perfectly invisible from the main road. We made sure we tucked ourselves on the path behind a hill. We couldn't see the road, therefore the road couldn't see us. Logic. For about an hour we camped out there bullshitting with each other when lo and behold some headlights hit us. I remember thinking, fuck, this is it, I'm about to lose my job. Sure enough, pulling up right beside us was our supervisor's vehicle. I rolled my window down and so did he. I saw a grin on his face. Oh, you sleep out here too? We both laughed about it and fooled around for a little while. I got lucky he was in a good mood and the fact that he's the type of guy to admit when he's no better than us. Had that been an inspector, we would have been on the curb quick. Now here's where the weird part starts. Our station is about 15 minutes from our little hiding spot. Our supervisor tells us he's heading back to the station to heat up some food and that he'll be right back. He takes off. Me and my partner go back to sitting in the complete darkness of the road talking to each other about something frankly I can't even remember. 15 minutes go by since our supervisor left, and we get some headlights that hit us again. I remember looking at my partner and saying that the supervisor's back early. I told my partner to roll down his window and I flashed our lights at him. Clear as day we saw the vehicle pass us. Chevy, same make and model as our supervisor's. Same license plate, same everything. Inside was pitch black. We couldn't see a thing through it, but that's not unusual at night. The patrol vehicle passed us and kept going further down the road. Huh, he must have wanted to go further back, I thought. Once again, this isn't too strange. He was probably worried someone from the road might get lucky and see us. So I put our vehicle in drive and turned around, only losing sight of this other vehicle for all of 30 seconds. Once we made a full 180, I remember seeing how far up the path his headlights were and kicking on the gas to catch up. This is where things get a bit strange. Once they hit the loop at the end of the path, they had to turn around and face us. Our headlights hit them dead on and I could tell you it wasn't one of our patrol vehicles anymore. They still had government plates, but the numbers were different than ours. The truck itself was a large all-terrain vehicle, a newer model. It kind of looked like a Sierra 1500 for those of you who know trucks, but this one had a few upgrades to it. For one, it had a spotlight on its roof, and two, it had a large visible cage in their trunk's bed. I didn't turn my sight from their truck, but I spoke out to my partner. What the hell is this? You saw a patrol vehicle pass us, right? Big badge on the side. I heard my partner give out a mumbled yup. I could tell he was staring at the vehicle in front of us. No one else is supposed to be on these roads. I tore my eyes over to my partner and saw him nod while still staring at the truck in front of us. We both had that feeling of something being wrong. I decided we needed to get some answers from these people, so I started to slowly pull up to his driver's side window, and as I did I noticed our lights couldn't pierce their windows. Once we stopped our patrol truck, driver's side to driver's side with theirs, we began to roll down our windows and so did they. As soon as I tried to look at whoever was in the vehicle, my sight went to shit. Everything went blurry as hell. It was like having an intense migraine without the pain going along with it. It was like a comfortable fog in my eyes and in my head. I did manage to get out some words though. "Hey, who are you and what are you doing out here?" I squinted in their direction, trying to see anything at all from inside the truck. All I could make out was a smaller cage in their back seat, just like the ones we have in our police vehicles. As soon as I could make out that much, I tried adjusting my sight on the driver. All I could make out was two shadowy blurs in the passenger side seat and the driver's side seat of the truck. I felt like my brain was taking a hot shit in that moment. I wouldn't have been able to connect two things together if they weren't tied to a string. I suppose, luckily for us, we got a reply from these blurs. The driver speaking to us happened to have a deep southern voice. As he spoke, he sounded so sure of himself, like he had the devil's tongue on his side. This is what he told us. "We're night shift. We patrol the roads." I remember nodding at the blur driver and mumbling all right to him. He rolled up his window and took off in his truck. It took us a few seconds to contemplate what had just happened. I even looked at my partner with a "what the fuck just happened" expression on my face. He spoke up before I did. "What the hell was that? I couldn't see a damn thing. Why'd we let them go? And what they said doesn't make any sense. We're night shift? So who the hell are they?" I can't tell you why I didn't ask them more questions or why I let them go, but I did. At this point in time, I knew they couldn't be too far ahead of us, so I zipped our truck around and headed after them. We caught sight of the tail end of their vehicle, and as soon as they hit the main road, it was still the same black truck we saw earlier. We decided to follow them. Now, we didn't have a reason to pull them over at this point. They weren't supposed to be on the dirt paths around here, but it wasn't breaking a law, and I, for whatever reason, already let them go for that. All we could do was keep tabs on them. We ended up radioing our supervisor while this was going on to get his location. We were sure he passed us earlier in his patrol truck. We figured maybe we didn't see him in the darkness of the path and ended up passing him before bumping into the black truck first. His reply over the radio was that he was still at the station and that he'd be on his way soon. Me and my partner shared a "what the hell is going on" look at each other. It only took us about 5 minutes of us tailing them to see them head off to another dirt path near some train tracks. Anything not on the main road was pitch black, so we lost sight of them for about 3 seconds before we turned our spotlight on. You know what we saw? Nothing. Absolutely nothing but a dirt road heading off alongside the train tracks. No signs of headlights in the distance, no tire marks, just a flat old dirt road. Me and my partner got the hell out of there and returned to our station. We told the supervisor what happened and he laughed it off but said we should have called for backup. So why the hell didn't we? Why the hell didn't we do anything at all? I wish I had an answer, but I don't. All I could say is my head wasn't in the right place at the time. If anyone has heard something similar to this or has any idea of who the hell they were, please let me know. We're the only night shift cops in the area. This has been bothering me for a while, and my partner ended up being transferred to another station a few countries over, and I haven't heard back from him about this, so I'm pretty much alone on this one. Thanks in advance for any help you can dish out. My little sister is 13 now. Her name is Zoe. She has blonde hair, blue eyes, and she likes pop music, fashion, and other typical teenage girl stuff. I really do love her. I must have been 7 or 8 when she first came home. I was excited to finally see my little sister. At first I had been annoyed that the baby was going to be a girl as I had wanted a little brother, but I was happy when she finally did come home. This kind of disappeared quickly though. It was about a week since Zoe first came home. My dog, Rusty, just would not calm down. Whenever he was in the same room as Zoe, he just barked like mad at her. Eventually, as my parents were scared that he would hurt her, they got rid of him. They didn't even talk to me. I just came home one day and he wasn't there. It was only when I asked about it that my mom just casually said, "Oh, we got rid of Rusty. We were worried about Zoe." Then she went back to feeding Zoe. I was confused. Both of my parents had just abandoned my dog, my best friend, in some pound somewhere, and they didn't even bother talking to me. They weren't even sorry. This was when I first started to gain some disdain towards her. It wasn't her fault, of course. If we had kept the dog, she probably would have loved him too. I just blamed her at the time. When she was 1, I was kicked out of my room. We lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, just on the outskirts of some big city. There was my room, where I kept all my stuff, my parents' room, which was where Zoe had slept in a cot in the corner, and the tiny guest room. My parents had decided that Zoe should have her own room, but instead of refurbishing the guest room for her, they kicked me out of my room and gave it to her. Any protest I had was quickly silenced, and I could only watch as my room, my one free area that I had any say in, was transformed. Sports posters were replaced with pictures of ducks and sheep. My bed was replaced with a pink wooden cot, and everything else that made my room mine was changed. They didn't even give me my bed or my TV or anything. All of the things like that were either thrown away or became Zoe's. They refused to refurbish the guest room for me, and I was instead forced to make do with the boring beige walls, an old metal single bed, and a single wooden dresser for my clothes. I did decorate it slightly, of course, with posters and other decorations I had managed to scavenge, but it wasn't the same. My parents seemed more concerned with where any guest we had were going to sleep. This was the point where disdain turned to hatred. It seemed to me as if they had just completely forgotten about me in favor of her. Eventually, my parents decided that I was old enough to be responsible and look after Zoe while they went out. I think she was 3 years old, so she was old enough to speak. I really didn't want to do it, but my parents wouldn't take no for an answer. They simply left, saying that they had left some pre-made lunch for her in the fridge. There wasn't one for me, so I had to make myself something. I couldn't be bothered with looking after her all day, as there was this TV show I wanted to watch. So I just laid a blanket in the corner, put a few of her favorite toys in there, and said this to her: "You need to stay on the blanket, don't move off it, okay? If you do, Mom and Dad will be really mad, so you have to stay in here, understand?" She simply nodded her head in agreement and started playing with her toys. I was on the couch watching my show, my eyes flicking to her when there was a commercial break or some boring segment. At one point, I was watching 2 of the characters on my show beating the tar out of each other. I felt a tugging on my trouser leg. I turned to see it was Zoe. She looked up to me, then sighed. "I'm hungry." "I told you not to come off the blanket," I said, shooing her away. She just sat back down on the blanket. I looked back to my show. It was a boring bit again. The victorious character was monologuing over the unconscious body of the loser. I couldn't just not feed her, harsh feelings aside. I got up and walked to the kitchen. As I was opening the fridge to get her lunch, I heard her say something from the other room. "Daddy won't come." I was confused, but not enough to stop me in my tracks. "What did you say?" I asked, carrying her lunch over to her. "He won't come." "Come where?" "Here, back." I was quite unnerved by this, but I didn't think anything of it. About a half an hour later, the phone rang. I didn't check the number, assuming it was my mom, but instead a male voice that wasn't my dad came through the receiver. "Hello, is this Daniel and Zoe?" The voice sounded serious and kind of upset and disturbed. Yeah, I'm Daniel. Who is this?" The voice then proceeds to explain to me, nice and clearly, that there had been a traffic accident. My mom was in critical yet stable condition. My dad was not so lucky. He had survived the initial collision, but died on the way to the hospital. The next few hours were a blur. I just switched off the TV and stared at the blank screen as I waited for my Uncle Jared, who was married to my dad's older sister, my Aunt Louisa, to pick me and Zoe up. We spent the next few days at his house. My aunt was inconsolable. I was just dull. I didn't speak. I barely left the bedroom I was in. Zoe was too young to grasp the situation, but they said that she understood that Dad was gone. The only thing I was thinking of until my mom came out of the hospital and we could go back home was what Zoe had said to me. It was as if she somehow knew what was going to happen. I didn't forget about it. It got to the point where it was unnerving to be in the same room as her. Another similar incident didn't come until much later, a year to be exact. It was a nice, sunny day. We all went for a walk in the park, me somewhat reluctantly, as by this point we had decorated my new room and I had a TV, which I had plugged a PS2 into. My mom held my sister's hand and I walked slightly behind, hands buried in my pockets and generally wishing to be home. It was all quiet, nobody really speaking, when Zoe pointed to an inconspicuous-looking guy in a hoodie. All she said was, "There's a bad man over there." My mom turned to look. A man in a gray sweatshirt stood by the fountain. He was staring at his feet, hands in his pockets. I looked too. Something about him did seem rather off, but I didn't think much of it. It was later on, when we had left the park and we were in the car on the way home, that I remembered how she had predicted Dad's death. I leaned over to her. "Zoe, what did you say about the man in the park? The bad man?" She turned to me. Her face was covered in chocolate from the chocolate bars Mom had given us. "The man had a knife. He was sad about something. He wanted to change it." She then turned back to look out the window. I was just frozen. He was sad about something? He wanted to change it? I wanted to ask my mom to call the police, but I knew she'd find it ridiculous. I just stared out my window too. The next morning, I was up before anyone else. I saw the local newspaper had arrived, so I picked it up to put it on the coffee table for my mom to read. As I did, I glanced at the front page headline, and I dropped the paper and almost jumped back in horror. "Family of 5 stabbed to death in home." Beneath it was a mugshot, a man in a gray sweatshirt. It was then that I realized Zoe had a talent. I stopped being distant and uncaring of her, and instead listened carefully to what she had to say about anything, asking her about random things that we saw. I would write down anything I found particularly interesting in a notebook I kept in my room. There wasn't anything major. She worked out when the goldfish was going to die, but that was the biggest thing. I eventually worked out that she could only make predictions linked to deaths. When she was 6, something big happened. She was watching some little girl TV show and eating when the phone rang. She turned to face my mom's boyfriend, David, as he picked up the phone. "Oh no," she said. I was on the other side of the couch reading a comic book. I looked over to her, expecting that something had just happened on the show, but she was staring at David. "What is it?" I asked. "Grandpa," she said, still looking. I froze. I could feel it in my gut that this was another prediction. We watched David talk on the phone. "Yes? Oh my God, really? Jesus. I'll tell Kathy. Okay, goodbye." Then he hung up. He noticed that the both of us were looking at him, and a sunken look came over him. "Ah, geez, kids, I have some bad news." I knew what he was going to tell us before he even said it. Grandpa had passed away in his sleep. Mom was sad. Zoe was sad. I tried to be sad about Grandpa, and I was. I was just more amazed and creeped out at Zoe. How did she do it? That was the last prediction for a long time. I eventually forgot about it, just chalking it up to coincidence. Last week, I got a phone call. Checking the caller ID, I saw that it was Zoe. I hadn't spoken to her in about a month, so I was pretty happy to see her name on the phone. I took the call. "Hi Zoe, how are you?" "Dan, are you there? I need to talk to you. Are you alone?" My girlfriend was sitting next to me watching TV. "Hold on, I'll move," I said, standing up. My girlfriend looked to me. "Who is it?" "It's just my sister. I need to talk in the other room." She just shrugged and turned back to the TV. I closed the door to my bedroom behind me. "I need you to listen to me. I got a terrible feeling, as if I knew something was going to happen. You and Megan should get out of your house. Go to a hotel or something. Just get out of there." I couldn't speak. Not only did she predict something again, but she was aware of the seriousness of the situation. Okay, I managed to say. "Okay, thank you." I hung up. Then I rushed back into the room where my girlfriend was sitting watching the TV. "Megan, we need to leave." "Why? What's wrong?" My sister had another prediction. We could be in danger. I told her about the predictions. She never believed any of it, or chalked it up to mere coincidence. Are you kidding me? I'm not going anywhere because your 13-year-old sister thinks we should. I told you about her predictions. This is serious, I shouted. After an hour of bickering and arguing, she finally agreed to leave. We went to a nearby hotel, booked a room for one night, and went to sleep. The next morning, I got a call from the neighbor. He said our house had been broken into, but nothing was taken. I told my girlfriend, and she was utterly dumbfounded. How in the hell did she know? Was all she said. We talked to the police and called my neighbor and told him to call the police if they returned. We stayed at the hotel again that night. When morning came, I was woken by my phone ringing. It was the police. We went to the police station and apparently Megan's mentally unstable ex-boyfriend broke into our house with a knife. They had arrested him when the neighbors called the police. It was obvious to all of us what he was going to do. My girlfriend hadn't said a thing. She was just completely blown away by what my sister had done. Without her, I would probably be dead. I talked to my sister about it, and all she had to say was this one thing. I could see your bodies lying on the bed. You were next to Dad, Grandpa, and 5 other people I didn't know. I've never felt more haunted than I did after hearing her say that. Nobody else believes it. Even my girlfriend is still skeptical, but I know for sure that my sister has a gift.
First I thought I was going crazy, that something in my head was unstable. I wondered if what I was seeing was even real. To this day, I still don't understand the events. Thanks to her, I can no longer tell fantasy apart from reality. It's scary, you know. I want to share this story. I want to share my story. I want to warn people about her. Let them know how serious this actually is. This is not a joke. I'm not doing this for attention. This is real. You have to listen. You have to listen. And you have to spread the word. Don't let her get a hold of you. Because once she does, you'll turn out like me. I just finished getting home from work, and I decided to lay down on the dusty old couch and watch the news. It wasn't peculiar or anything like that. I mean, I always watch the news after work. As I was listening to the reports on robberies, drug busts, and riots, something interesting caught my eye. Most generally, nothing on the news really captivated me and got my full attention. But this did. It was murder. Well, to be precise, more than one. Several, in fact. Reporters stated that every victim involved in the incident was skinned and butchered. But that wasn't what attracted me to the details. The town, Birmingham, that was my town. It was unbelievable. Sure, robberies, riots, and drugs, I could understand. But murder? Not only that, but the reporters said that the incident had been going on for over a week. Shit, where the hell had I been? I'd been watching the news every night at 6 for the past 2 years, so how in the hell could I have missed something like that? Did I zone out maybe? Or something like that? Must have. Anyways, I ended up listening to the story for a bit before I eventually turned off the television and put some popcorn into the microwave. I realized that turning the TV off was kind of an ignorant thing to do, but you see, when I think, I need it to be quiet, or else my mind goes in all different directions. I must have spent at least an hour trying to wrap my head around the possibilities as to how I could have missed such a distressful event. I keep repeating this part because it's how I honestly felt at the time. It just didn't make any sense how something that big could slip right under my nose. Me being me, it didn't take long to eventually pass out. Funny thing was that the popcorn bowl was still secured in my hands as I slept, and once I finally woke up the next day, I noticed the kernels scattered around the floor and the couch. Let's just say I had a lot of cleaning up to do. I picked up the floor, vacuumed, and just to make myself feel at least a little bit unsullied, I went ahead and undertook the dishes. Oh, and one minuscule little detail you should keep in mind. When I was doing the dishes, I accidentally skewered myself with a knife like the half-wit I am. Moving on with the story. About 5 minutes after I fulfilled my dish duty, I got a knock on my door. Obviously, when a person knocks, you open it. At least I do anyways. So that's exactly what I did. I'll be honest, I think I crapped myself when I opened the door. I was stuck between two feelings. Number 1, holy smokes, a hot babe. And 2, what the fuck? It was a woman, however, not just any woman. This woman gave me an immediate shiver. I couldn't tell whether or not it was good or bad, but damn did I feel it. It felt icy, paralyzing, perplexing. The shiver was so vigorous that every single hair on my body stood up as if each individual hair were in a roll call order for the military. Being a fan of creepy and many other fucked up things, I was captivated and ecstatic inside. But on the same note, I felt transfixed. I question this because I was never good at making out emotions. This lady's hair, holy shit, it was on fire. Literally. Okay, maybe not literally on fire, but it was exceedingly close to being on fire. It was bright red. I'm talking fire truck red. Aside from that attraction, her eyes were also red. Crimson to be exact. Jesus. So it was true. People really did wear unnatural colored contact lenses in public. Don't get me wrong here. I think they're absolutely off the chain. But weren't things like those meant to be worn during Halloween or something like that? Last I checked, it was July 14th, 2002. Hell, who knows? They could have switched Halloween to July. Frankly, it wouldn't surprise me. I live in America. I remember exactly what she said to me. Hello, I'm Charlene, your new neighbor. Of course, I responded to her greeting, and there was really nothing strange about any of that. But what really freaked me out was what came next. You remember how I mentioned I got skewered by a knife? Yeah, well, this chick did the most creepiest thing, I swear to God, I've ever seen before. She reached out with those long, pale arms of hers, grabbed my hand, and began to slowly caress my wound as she muttered softly, "Your skin, it's sensitive. You bleed a lot easier than others. How astounding." What? Astounding. That's it. Those were the only few sentences that came out of her mouth. Even to this day, I still get the creepy crawlies just thinking about it. I slowly pulled my hand away, my heart beating a mile a minute as I choked back a raspy breath. In my mind, I didn't thoroughly comprehend what the mysterious lady had done. It was like I'd fallen into an immediate trance after her skin grazed against mine. Her skin, that rugged, patchy skin, it looked so irregular, unnatural. Those crimson eyes stared into mine as she slowly leaned in, gave a discombobulated smirk, turned and walked away. That night I couldn't sleep. You see, I like to call myself a realist, so for the longest time I sat. I tried to come up with any logical explanation as what could have perchance caused my new neighbor to act the way she did. What if she was on some kind of medication, mentally challenged? Fuck's sake, high. Now, to you, you might be thinking, Sean, don't you think you are overreacting a little bit? No, I was not overreacting. That lady Charlene, she did something to me. I tried to tell people. I really did, but no one would listen to me. They didn't believe me. They said I needed to go to a therapist. I wasn't crazy. I'm not crazy now. I never was. I swear, this really happened. The next day I was off, so I took my free time and spent it relaxing in the living room. I'll admit, I felt a hell of a lot better that day than the previous one. I wasn't so riled up. I specifically remember a feeling of apprehension as I heard a knock on the door. I got up, situated a hand on the doorknob, then swung the door open. Thank God it wasn't her. It was a man. More specifically, the mailman. He asked me to sign in order to receive a package, but I didn't remember ever ordering anything, and no one ever really sent me anything. So I was a bit demented. Nonetheless, though, I signed the paper and took the package before securing the door. I scanned the medium-sized box, examining it to see if maybe there was some sort of contact information. My throat went dry. I did find a name and I read it out loud. Charlene Valentine. It was obvious the mailman had unintentionally mixed up the addresses. I honestly thought about just keeping the package, but then a huge wave of potential guilt washed over me. I had to return the package to its rightful owner. So that's what I did. Just as soon as I stepped onto Charlene's doorstep, I heard these strange voices. They sang the same sentence over and over again. Charlene, Charlene, you're sure to scream. I debunked this as some sort of television show of the sort. That or the possibility she was a part of some kind of horror project. I took a breath in, then knocked on the door a few times. I waited, and I waited, but nothing. No one came to the door. I don't know why I even did it, but I decided to turn the doorknob, and to my incredulity, it was unlocked. This was perfect, though. I could just quietly sneak in, drop off the package, and then leave without Charlene ever knowing. I know what you're thinking. Sean, why didn't you just leave the package on her doorstep? Believe me, that was my original plan, but with the recent robbery cases and all that jazz, I didn't want someone to just waltz by and snatch it up. After all, I am a good guy, so I've been told. I walked in and almost immediately I smelt this disgusting smell. It was the most nauseating, most revolting thing I'd ever smelt in my entire life. As I soundlessly walked across the living room floor, I looked around momentarily before eventually setting the box down on the kitchen table. There was no hiding the fact that I was dying inside. This house it made me feel like I was in an actual horror film. Once again, I love horror, gore, and whatnot, but you don't understand how terrified that house made me feel. As I turned preparing to exit through the doorway, I heard clanking. It sounded as if someone were banging two metal pipes together. It was absolutely deafening. Every time I'd watch a scary movie, I'd always yell about one specific thing. Why? Why did they always have to check out a noise? That's what got them all killed. Lord behold, here I was investigating the creepiest fucking noise in my life. By this time in the story, I'm sure you can realize just how ignorant I really am. I won't deny it. Eventually I discovered that the noise was coming from underneath the floor. The basement. Cautiously, I made my way to the top of the basement staircase, and once again heard that chant. This time it was ringing inside my head. Charlene, Charlene, you're sure to scream. About 6 or so steps, there was a long, narrow window in the wall, and when I peeked through it, my chest caved in. It was she, Charlene. I'm sorry. Telling all of this brings back some unwanted flashbacks. Anyways, I got a little bit closer, thinking that perhaps either my eyesight was just off or that I wasn't close enough to see what was really going on. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. There was a large lab table in the center of the room. It seemed a bit old-fashioned. I guess a way to describe it would be a sort of vintage style. Classic. There was a body on the table, a real human body. Though it was nearly butchered by the time my eyes were set on it, there were loads and loads of tools scattered throughout the room. Some were on blood-stained tables, some were displayed on the wall, on shelves, and some were even strung all over the floor. Hovering over the blood-eating, close-to-slaughtered corpse was Charlene. Fearing that I'd be seized if I made a single solitary noise, I practically held my breath. Everything just looked so unrealistic, so unfeasible that I was unable to properly load the situation in my head. My eyes were shot to the side, watching as long, patchy hands retrieved a scalpel from one of the tables in the room. As I watched that scalpel cut into the flesh on that table, I gagged. I felt an instantaneous affliction in my stomach. The scene was so grim that I had to cover my mouth. It was at that time I realized butcher, skin, murder. Everything fell right into place. Charlene was the killer. As soon as she carved off a piece of skin, that was it. I was out of there. Slowly, I began to turn around, but just as I was a few steps down from the top of the stairs, a loud creak sounded through the entire house. Shit. There was no time for being inaudible now. I bolted up the last few stairs, immediately hearing foreign footsteps behind me. The door was right there. It was only a few feet away, but before I could escape, I felt a hand grab onto the back of my shirt and fiercely yank me away from the doorway. My heart was beating faster than a racehorse, and it was at that time my life flashed before my eyes. With all the strength I had, I thrashed and jerked around. I used everything in my body I could in order to break free of that woman's death grip. I finally got loose, but it was only a matter of seconds before everything went completely black. When I came to, I was tied down, wrists, feet, and all. I was unable to yell due to the fabric tied around my mouth. I could hear my erratic heartbeat obnoxiously ringing in my eardrums as I looked at my surroundings. Once again, I heard it. Charlene, you're sure to scream. Charlene stood in front of the table, her back turned away from me as the sound of metal clinked together. She faced me. Good, you're awake, she said. You know, eavesdropping isn't very nice, though I'm very happy you could join me. Me and my children were getting terribly lonely. I was confused at first with the word children, but as soon as those sickening hands of hers rubbed along the patchy area of skin on her arm, I got the memo. When she walked up beside me, I lost it. I tried to break free. I tried, but to no avail. It was long before I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen, crimson-colored liquid rushing down my bare, exposed skin. Honestly, in that moment, I was glad my mouth was covered. If I had to listen to my ear-piercing screams, I most likely would have broken down right then and there. I couldn't tell you how long I was on that table because seconds felt like hours. Hours and hours of agonizing pain. After what happened seemed like decades, my body finally went numb. I closed my eyes somewhere in the beginning, but after I opened them back up, I noticed that Charlene had stopped carving my body in order to switch up her murder tool. This was my chance. As quickly and quietly as I could, I tugged on the ropes that restrained my hands and feet. I prayed, and like a miracle had been given to me, the ropes miraculously gave away. Thank goodness I couldn't feel anything at the moment, or else I wouldn't have been able to run up those stairs as fast as I did. I didn't look back, and I didn't stop for nothing. I didn't care about clothes. I didn't care about anything else I potentially left behind. I closed my eyes as I hauled ass towards the front door. I stumbled a few times, but I didn't let that stop me. I kept going and going until I eventually made it out. I was lucky enough to survive her attack, but others might not be so lucky. Please, you have to warn people about Charlene. If you don't spread the word, she'll... Charlene, you're sure to scream.
Hey guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So, I got a lot of thank yous. Thank you so much, Southern Cannibal and Typical Madman, for helping me out with this very long video. I hope all of you guys enjoy it, and I hope you guys enjoy Typical Madman and Southern Cannibal. Please check them out, and I definitely think you guys will like them. And Southern Cannibal, you overstaying your welcome a little bit, man. I'm only playing with you. But seriously, guys, check both of them out. They're awesome. And I have to give another really big thank you to the 2 Reddit users that let me use their stories, Cardboard Pizzas and Strange Accounts. Strange Accounts is the one story with the cop car, and from what he was telling me is that story is actually confirmed to be true and is an actual experience that happened to him. That is very scary, I'm not gonna lie. If I was a cop and I encountered that, I have no idea what I would have done. That is beyond creepy. And Cardboard Pizza's story was the My Sister Has an Unusual Talent. That story is also really creepy. Very scary, and just, wow. Awesomely written. Love both of them. And well, guys, once again, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.